All right, go for it. Hi, everyone. This is Ashley Kilroy with Excise and License. We're getting ready to start our marijuana licensing work group. So give us a few minutes. It's exactly 1 o'clock. We'll wait about 2 more minutes so everybody can gather. So, hi, everyone. Josie, are you okay?
You have some bad timing, puppy face.
So guys, can y'all please mute your microphone if you're not speaking? Although I do love hearing whoever it is chatting with their child. I think you called her puppy face. Or him. It looks like we have people still gathering. And I'll wait about 1 more minute. Seeing everybody getting settled. Hi, Sarah. How are you? You're muted, but that's okay. All right, so it is about 1:02 and we'll get started. My name is Ashley Kilroy and I'm the Executive Director of Excise and License. Thank you for being here today. This is the third of our 4 marijuana licensing work groups where we are looking at new marijuana licenses and developing a social equity program for those licenses. So I think first, before we get started, I know all of you, probably all of you have heard me say before that the mayor has always said, Mayor Hancock has always said that in the city, we look at everything that we do through a race and social equity lens. And, you know, the recent murder of George Floyd has only heightened that call to action. And you guys know we've got a number of city employees on this call. We also have city employees in the background. I'm running this call and making it happen. So on behalf of our city employees who are on this call with me, I just wanted to let you know we all condemn all forms of racism. And like you, we are outraged by this, you know, horrific murder that we all witnessed on television or on video. The mayor sent a letter out, I think about 2 or 3 days ago, to our city employees, and I just wanted to read from that a statement that he made. The mayor acknowledged that we're all hurting as a nation, and he said, quote, "This is a time for unity, justice, and change in our city. It is a time to be genuine, vulnerable, and to extend ourselves to one another. No matter what feelings this past week may have brought to the surface, you are not alone." So we are here, our great work group here, and the people who are watching, we're here today to take action in one area that we do have, you know, a purview over or control over, you know, marijuana licensing from Excise and Licenses standpoint, and from you industry representatives, the marijuana industry. But we, you know, we know that there are enduring disparities that our communities of color are facing. And that if this moment is just about police reform, that's not enough. We see those disparities, you know, right now in education, in employment, in health, access to health care, and housing, and everything. And so this is what we are here today to talk about the one area that we can have an impact in addition to others. But today we're focusing on cannabis licensing. We also acknowledge as a city that a lot of these enduring disparities are due to systemic issues, institutional issues, and things that have been put in place by the government. And so we know that we need to do more. You've heard us talk before. We have done some work around this. We've worked on a free program to vacate marijuana convictions, and a lot of you on this call helped us out with that. We really appreciate that. We've also, used marijuana tax dollars to contribute to affordable housing, to support youth programming, to provide capital improvement projects in low and moderate income neighborhoods. We felt good about that, but that's not enough. So we're turning our attention with your help. Our work today is going to be talking about ownership in the cannabis industry, workforce development and employment in the cannabis industry. And we really appreciate your wisdom and guidance as we work through this. And I'm looking forward to a good meeting and a robust discussion. So I'll turn it over to Molly.
All right. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well today. Excited to jump into this conversation and hear from all of you. I know this is kind of the one we've been focusing on all along, and so excited to make some progress and hear some good ideas from everybody. So I will go ahead and share the presentation now, I think. Sorry, just one moment. There we go. So we are going to start the way we did the last couple of times, and we will have just do some introductions and just make sure that we have everybody on the call and see if we can get everybody to have audio and everything. So first, Ashley and myself. So I'm Molly Dupleshain, Deputy Director of Excise and Licenses. And then we'll just kind of run through quickly and just let us know if you're here. Councilwoman Black.
I am here. Thank you for hosting the meeting. I'm going to turn off the video because I'm still wearing my running clothes. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you. Glad you got out on a run today. Councilwoman Sita Baca.
I'm here.
Hello. Councilman Hines. No Councilman Hines today. All right. Kenneth Allison.
Present.
Hello.
Hi.
I believe Reggie Newbine is our Denver City Attorney, one of our Denver City Attorneys on the call today. You're here, Reggie?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello. And then do we have John Bailey?
He's here.
Hi, John. We can hear you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great.
I appreciate all the technology support.
Awesome. Good. Sarah Belstock.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Truman Bradley.
Hi there.
Hello. Diane Cooks. No? Okay. Sean Coleman. We have Sean. Okay, not today.
I can see him. He's
Sean,
not. Yeah.
You now?
Yep.
Yes.
There you go. And then Jacqueline Fluke.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Michelle Garcia.
Here.
Hello. Michelle Holeen.
Hello.
Hi there. Andrew Howard.
I'm here. Hi.
Hi, Lieutenant. How are you?
Great.
Good. Clarissa Creek.
Hi.
Hello. Henny Lastly.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Jason Moore.
Hey, everybody.
Hi, Jason. Dan Pabone.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here today.
Thank you. Jessica Scardina.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Jessica. And then Ian Sieb.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm here.
Great. Ryan Tatum.
Ryan is having some
Yes,
tech
I am
issues. We're
here.
solving it right now. He's gonna be. Oh, there we go.
Oh,
Yep.
sounds like
Yeah, thank you, Bia. We figured it out. Yep, here. Thank you.
All right, Artway.
Yes, hello, everybody.
Hi there. And Sarah Woodson.
Hey, Molly, before you keep going, Michelle, Michelle Holine, I noticed last time your microphone seems like it's really low when you speak. Molly, can you hear Michelle well when she speaks, or is it just me?
Michelle, you want to give us another test?
Sure. Yeah, I've got my earbuds in, but you're saying it's pretty low.
Yeah, and I think it was last time too. So just maybe speak a little louder when you speak.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Yep. And did we get Sarah? Sarah, can we hear you?
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Great. Hi. All right. And then just a reminder to the viewers, if you want to confirm your attendance or that you're watching or receive future updates or the minutes or communications, you can email marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. I'll just quickly go through the ground rules and the meeting format that we've had, same as we've had the last couple of times. So just a reminder, this marijuana licensing work group is an advisory work group. It's to review, discuss, and make recommendations on the policy direction of possible marijuana licensing laws, rules, and regulations. Since it's advisory in nature, we'll be reviewing and discussing ideas and options that will be developed later on down the road into recommendations that will be brought to the mayor and his administration, and then any ordinance changes will require city council approval. Which would have a whole other public input process and public hearing process as well. And just as a reminder for everybody to, listen, to try not to speak over each other. I know that is hard to not interrupt when we're on this type of call, but just be respectful and professional and treat each other with civility and courtesy, and make sure that we're hearing one another and giving everybody an opportunity to voice their input and opinion. So we'll present some information. We've got quite a bit of background information that we'll start with today, and then we'll go into some discussion questions. These discussion questions are purely for the purpose of discussion and opening up the conversation, and so they're not supposed to be limited. They're just ideas for discussion, and additional ideas can always be put onto the table and opened up for discussion. As a couple of reminders, please announce your name before you're beginning speaking. This helps Bia know which person to move the camera to, as well as the public just know who is speaking and who and kind of what background they represent. If you have a chat or have a question or something that you want to put into the chat, state I have a question, but we're going to try to limit the chat to just that to queue up people for questions, so that we don't get distracted with conversations that are occurring in the chat. Please try to limit anything that you put into the chat to just kind of put yourself in line for a statement or a question. To the people watching from the public, there's a link to the website where all of this information is posted, the link to the final meeting, as well as all the documents from today and the previous meetings. And this is where we will be putting up the minutes and the link to the video from today's meeting. And you can there'll also be a template for written comments that will be posted up there. It might already be up there right now. And those can be emailed to marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. Just a reminder of kind of—
Molly.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but
no, you're fine.
I'm just looking at the chat, and I don't know if everyone else is having this issue, but it says you can't send messages because you are not a member of the chat.
Oh.
So maybe that's just me, and if so, I'll figure it out. Yeah, Truman could just reply. Maybe it's just mine, so.
Okay.
Who is that? Sorry, is it
Everyone has passed the test. I'm not. I'm failing it.
Is that Dan?
Dan, yeah.
Then let's can you email me your phone and let's figure out that offline?
Okay, sure.
And you can just chime in, Dan, or if you want to text Bia if you have a question, then we can put you in the queue that way too.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So Just a quick reminder of the goals for implementation. We want to meet the needs of the residents, businesses, and visitors of Denver while considering thoughtful, responsible implementation and ensuring the health, safety, and well-being of our city. And kind of at the core, as Ashley said, our kind of guiding star is always going to be looking at all of this through an equity lens. So we'll jump into the topic of the day, which is developing a marijuana equity program. And so I believe we have Michelle on here. We presented this slide the first meeting, but just a quick reminder and overview from Michelle with the Office of Social Equity and Innovation on what the city uses as our definition of equity.
So we use the definitions from our national partners, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. They are an organizing body for local governments. There's over 105 local governments in the network that are committed to racial equity. So we align our equity definition with theirs for the purpose of creating a collective social action that can really work to achieve sort of change on a large scale across many different forms of local government. So inequity is when race and other characteristics of identity can be used to predict life outcomes. We see this across spheres and domains. Like Ashley mentioned, that we see inequities that are persistent and pervasive, and in education, in unemployment, in arrest and incarceration, across really all spheres that can be measured. You see statistically significant disparities among racial groups. So equity would be when race and other characteristics of identity can no longer be used to predict life outcomes, and outcomes for all groups are improved. And we do this with our goal of achieving targeted universalism, which is creating a universal goal and understanding that equity requires that we have different strategies to get all people to that goal. And it applies obviously in the cannabis equity space as well. Next slide.
Let's see. Okay.
So creating an equitable marijuana licensing program. Wait, is this yours?
Yeah, well, you can go ahead and do it if you want.
No, go ahead.
So this slide, we presented this slide at the first meeting too, and this is just kind of, again, putting some definition around what it is that we're trying to create, or some structure. And so just thinking about when we're having these conversations, making sure that we have what our goal is in mind, and that's to make sure we're creating a program that's equitable, meaningful, and sustainable. And so, we want to create a program that is effective, and one that can withstand some legal challenges as well as some operational challenges, but also really be, effective and impact the population and the goals that we're trying to achieve. So it's a lofty goal to achieve all of those, but we think we can do it, and we're hoping we can. So just to start with a little bit of background and data, there's a little bit here that we got from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and then I'll jump into a couple of slides from the report that we released this week of the Cannabis Business and Employment Opportunity Study. But first, just these two slides on some arrest data. This first slide, you can see that Blacks and African Americans had a higher rate of arrests historically, marijuana arrests. This graph here is for 21 and older. We have data from the whole data set from 10 to 17-year-old and 17 to 21. And so if anybody's interested in that, we have that as well. But for sake of time and reducing the number of slides, this is the one that we have provided here. You can see that obviously the number of arrests dropped after legalization, but you can still see that disproportionate impact with, what is the red line? With 63% arrests for Black people, and then the white, I think, is down at 27%. And then on this next slide, you can also see that there's a disparity in the gender arrests where between men and women, where arrests for men is significantly higher than arrests for women for marijuana offenses. So those are a couple pieces of data along with a few others that we have had and we've known about. And so Denver's been having these conversations over the last couple of years around what can we do. And so here's just a couple of examples of what we have done so far. Ashley touched on these at the beginning, but two things that we have done is one, we created the Turnover a New Leaf program in 2019, which created a program to provide free assistance to individuals seeking to clear and seal low-level marijuana convictions for offenses that are now legal. Throughout 2019, we held 5 clinics and received 508 applications and identified 95 convictions eligible for expungement. Obviously, we'd always like to see that number higher than 95. You can still go out and apply for this program online, and that's still an existing program, and we're still taking applications for that as well. And are always interested in the conversations that are occurring at the state level to do a broader expungement effort as well. For the marijuana tax revenue side, a portion of marijuana tax revenues, marijuana taxes help double the Affordable Housing Fund from $15 million to $30 million, and that will help build 6,000 units. So in 2018, the special tax on retail marijuana was increased by 2%, and that 2% is dedicated to the Affordable Housing Fund, which has had a great impact on, putting some resources into that fund. In 2019, also Denver special retail marijuana tax was allocated to the Affordable Housing Fund, which supports that same housing effort, including those for economically disadvantaged people due to the war on drugs. And then prior to 2019 as well, from the special sales tax, more than $10 million of marijuana tax revenue was used to fund free after school and summer programs with a focus on underserved communities. And also there were diversion programs that were supported with a high focus on those similar high need areas in Denver. So I will now jump into a couple of slides about the Denver Cannabis and Employment Opportunity Study. And then before we jump into the questions, I think I'll take a pause and see if anybody has questions on all of this. So we'll get through these couple of slides, and then we'll turn it over to you for a couple of questions or see if anybody has any questions. But this is the report that was released on Monday, the Denver Cannabis Employment and Opportunity Study. We commissioned this study in 2019. With the goal of providing a high-level overview of existing business and employment conditions in the cannabis industry. We wanted a snapshot of the characteristics of the firm, business and employment outcomes, and as well as just looking at the challenges to equitable access within the cannabis industry. There were several different approaches and methods that were used to obtain information for this study. They're identified there. We did some key informant the people that conducted the study did key informant interviews, held some stakeholder sessions and public forums, released an online survey, and then just looked at secondary data sets such as the MED data on occupational licensee demographics, other equity plans from other jurisdictions, and looked at just the cannabis market conditions across Colorado and Denver and the country in general. So you can see what some of the numbers are there for the number of respondents and the number of people that attended the stakeholder sessions and forums. A lot of people on this call were extremely helpful in helping this study happen, as well as helping shape what the study was going to look like. Many of you helped us with, reaching out to your networks and making sure that the survey was distributed and making sure that people were invited to the stakeholder sessions and attended the town halls. Many of you, I think John and a couple of other people reviewed some of the RFP questions as well as some of the questions for the survey. I know we sent the survey out and the invitations to the stakeholder sessions to council members, and we sent it out through our industry bulletin several times. And so we know yet that this is still a pretty small sample. And so while we're looking at the data on the next couple of slides, it even says in the report that due to this small sample size, the results should be read with caution or interpreted with caution. So, the data is as good as the respondents. And so this is the information that we have available based on this study. The sample size is small. We do think it still tells a decent story, at least from these people that were able to respond. So, the full report, there's a link to it down at the bottom of that slide. And the next couple of slides just review some of the key findings and highlights.
And we have Andy Sidbaka and Henny Leslie for questions.
Okay. All right, I'm going to get through the data slides that highlight the study, and then we'll come back to you. So first of all, this first slide just identifies among those online survey respondents what their background is. And so obviously there's a high percentage of white people that are within the cannabis industry. So 75% are white or that responded to this survey. This is, you know, kind of like many other markets throughout the country. And what we thought we'd kind of find, but it just kind of reiterates or emphasizes what Ashley was saying is our call to action and our need to change and increase the diversity within the cannabis space. It is supported, basically, what we found in the survey is supported by some 2018 demographic data released by the Colorado Marijuana Enforcement Division. So this was their types of licenses, occupational licenses that they had in 2018, which is a different structure now, but you can see kind of the same breakdown of a high percentage of demographic licensees being white. What the study found, or one of the things that the study found is when they asked about challenges to participation by ownership or employment status, it was pretty different from what employees thought versus what owners thought. And where the biggest discrepancies were regarding criminal background check, the limited number of licenses available, and licensing procedures. But then the other ones listed there as far as what are challenges to participation included banking regulations, zoning regulations, finding a location, and startup costs. The biggest barrier that survey respondents and people that participated in the stakeholder outreach was found that 70% found that the low pay of entry-level jobs were the biggest barrier to employment within the cannabis industry. With 70% stating that. About 40% cited lack of opportunities to get their foot in the door, as well as 1/3 of respondents pointing to a lack of training in the required skills. And so that one was employment. This one is in ownership. And so looking at some of the biggest barriers to ownership, the survey respondents and the people that participated in the study, the largest one was over about 77% stating that access to capital was the biggest barrier to ownership. And that was stated by about 3 out of 4 respondents, with some of the other high-ranking ones being the challenge in finding real estate or a physical location, as well as just the complexity of the regulations. And then when asked what would they do, what would help in advancing or employment or ownership opportunities within the industry, 3 things kind of rose to the top. The first one being information on how to access capital, next being training and industry best practices, and then finally business knowledge such as business plan development or accounting. So this last slide just kind of summarizes what the priorities were that identified, and that was done based on kind of ranking the items that were identified with high importance but low satisfaction. So to review those, opportunities for ownership, removing barriers of previous arrests, equity in hiring, opportunities for expansion or innovation, growth as an industry, and employment opportunities. And then kind of on a higher level, looking at what are some of the social justice issues that were identified, expungement of marijuana arrests, empowering communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, ensuring entry-level cannabis industry jobs pay a living wage, addressing racism as well as sexism and lack of inclusiveness in the cannabis industry, and controlling regulation, opening the licensing process, and lowering cost to entry. So again, you know, this is one piece of information to help guide our conversation today. We still want to hear from all of you. We understand the sample size is small, and we're looking forward to kind of supplementing what we learned through this study with hearing from you all today and everything that we've researched and read about and have learned over the last year or so. So with that, I will turn it over and see if we have questions. I believe it was Councilwoman Cedar Baca was first.
Yes, and then Henny, and then Clarissa. Oh no,
Okay.
Henny withdrew. So Councilwoman, and
And
then
now
Clarissa, and then
Yeah,
John
you
Bailey.
can include-
Okay, yeah, and then John.
Okay, Councilwoman.
Multiple questions here. In the slide where you mentioned the dollars that were allocated for housing, you mentioned that a lot of that was for people who were criminalized by the war on drugs. How do we know that? Are we tracking it? Because I've never seen that data before.
That's a good question. So we'd have to pull in the affordable housing folks to see. But yes, I do believe that they target certain areas and communities within the city for those affordable housing funds.
But do we ask anybody who gets affordable housing in the city of Denver if they have been affected by the war on drugs?
We can turn to some members and host and ask that question of them.
Okay, because I've never seen that, so I don't think that we should be including that that sentence in this presentation if we're not intentionally doing that. Second question. Was the survey that you all paid for focused specifically on equity, or what was the focus of the survey?
The focus of the survey was, yes, it was equity. It was finding, identifying, like who are the owners, who are the employees within the industry, and then also identifying those barriers to entry, with the goal of providing us input and information we need to develop an equity program.
And so with that, who was the company that we hired to do that study?
Their name was Analytic Insight.
Are they minority owned?
They are not.
And if we were doing a study on equity and we found that the demographics of ownership suggested that there's not equity, how did we create a second component to oversample people who are not represented to get their input on barriers?
I'm sorry, I'm not following your question. Can you repeat the question?
So if you have an industry where we've identified that there is a lack of equity, you have much more than 75% white ownership. Why would we continue asking them what the barriers to entry are for people who are left out?
Sure. So yeah, so it wasn't just industry members that participated in the survey. We sent the survey out pretty extensively to both industry members and non-industry members. So we asked lots of people that are not in the industry currently, but were prospective members of the industry or people that were looking to get into the industry. We surveyed and included them in our outreach as well.
So is there disaggregated data by race for the responses? Because the responses you lumped together, or the consultants lumped together owners and employees in that 6% that you showed. But the responses themselves are not disaggregated by race.
So there is other information within the full report that breaks that down a little bit more, where you can see what the survey respondents were, and then what I provided here was ownership, employees, not in the industry, that breakdown.
It would be helpful to have that disaggregated data, because when I'm looking at the responses regarding barriers, I don't know who's telling me that those are the barriers.
Sure. Yep.
And is there a list of the respondents in that link?
Of who exactly responded? No. I mean, we don't have that information. The vendor would have that information, but I mean, I don't. It was several of the responses for the survey were anonymous. It was not. It was not required that you identify yourself as part of the response.
Can we, since we own that data, can we get that whatever there is, whether they indicate anonymous or their name or their company? Can we get that?
Sure, I'll reach out.
Awesome, thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay. And then let's see, was it Clarissa that was next?
Yes, Clarissa next, then John Bailey, then Kenneth.
Okay.
Hi, Clarissa with the National Cannabis Industry Association. I wanted to thank the City of Denver and commend you for the Turnover New Leaf program and having identified those 95 people that can be looking at their records sealed or expunged. But it is my understanding that we are not able to do this in mass numbers or in automatic fashion like other cities can. And it's also my understanding this is a legal limitation. Is there room within the state law to change this so that we can look for a greater scale here in terms of looking at these records?
For Denver locally? Or are you asking for statewide?
Well, my understanding is that it's a state limitation, is it not, Molly?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, for us, we would need some changes in state law if we wanted to do this on a broader effort. And so I don't know if Ian or somebody wants to chime in on that, but I know there was some potential bills that were running forward before the legislature shut down, but I don't think those were reignited during this brief session. But Ian, do you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. With the disclosure that I'm not an attorney and can't explain all the legal nuances, but what I've come to learn, Clarissa, and for everybody else on here, is that the way that Colorado records its convictions is much different than other states, and many states have a centralized database where all the information is kept. Many local jurisdictions, for example, Denver doesn't provide, as well as others, but doesn't provide their information to a central repository where all this is done. And so anything done at a state level needs to incorporate all local jurisdictions opting in, essentially. And there's different databases, and they're connected in different ways. Everybody went online at different places. Rural jurisdictions went online much later than other jurisdictions, and so there's a lot of challenges. I can tell you that it is something that is being looked at. Was part of a record sealing work group this past several months, where we were talking about how this could be done in terms of record sealing and all the work that needs to be done and the IT pieces that need to be set up to be able to allow this. So it's definitely a conversation that's taking place. But what I can tell you from my non-legal mind is that it's a very complicated process, and you can't just turn a switch and automatically do that at a state level, given some of the technical complications and the way local jurisdictions are set up to communicate with the state for convictions and criminal records.
Thank you.
Thank you. So then we have John next.
Yes. How's everybody?
Great. Good.
Good. I got a statement and then several questions. One, if you look at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation data, all those black folks are still in jail. The majority of them. I just wanted to make that as a statement, because anybody who's been arrested because we have no social equity, because we have no expungement, those folks are still there, number one. Number two, and I'm going to go by slide, I guess, creating an equitable management licensing program, there was a question about what we can learn from other states, other cities and states. What have we learned from other cities and states?
A lot, actually. It's nice to not be first. That's what we've learned. I think it would be helpful. I think it would be helpful, rather than just say we learned a lot. I think it would be helpful to give us some type of schematic that will allow us to see what California, what Washington, what Massachusetts, what Illinois is doing. I think that would be a helpful piece for us. Sure. Yeah. So I think that's a great point, John. And if you don't mind, I think I can run over a couple of things real quickly, but I think that's a great suggestion, and maybe we can spend a little bit more time on that and even put a couple of slides together for our final meeting, because we have looked a lot at those programs and have some thoughts, and even the people that have developed those programs, we talk with them on a regular basis, and they have addressed those challenges with us. And so rather than, I think, being brief about it now, I think that's a great question and something we can put together for the next presentation.
Sounds good. What has Denver done so far? Marijuana tax revenue. Question, how can these funds, well, number one, are these funds going to be used the same way in 2021 that they were in 2019 and then from 2015 and 2019? Because I'm moving towards whether or not these funds can be used for equity initiatives in the arena.
Sorry, was that a question or a comment?
Yeah, that was a question. Whether or not the funds that have been used theoretically for affordable housing and after-school programs, are they going to continue to be used in that way, or will they be transitioned towards something else? City budget, shortfalls, those types of things.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I have a question kind of somewhat along those lines towards the end of the presentation today. The city is in an economic situation that we're going to have to address. We are in the middle of the budget process right now. We hope that those funds will still be available for those purposes. We know that the 2% of affordable housing funding is dedicated by the law that was, by the ordinance that was created that increased that sales tax. So that's not going to change, and we're going to work hard to make sure that the other programs are still funded going forward.
Well, the reason I'm saying that is because if there's a shortfall and all of the work that y'all have done and the work that you've laid out and the work that the study suggests requires some infrastructure and some support and some dollars to be able to get this done. And so I just want to make sure that as we think about and come up with all these good ideas, that we also keep in mind the infrastructure to do the work, to operationalize all of the suggestions that we're putting forward here today. I'm going to move on. Denver Cannabis and Employment Opportunity Study challenges participation by ownership and employment. What have we done in each of the categories of challenges to ensure that there's equity? Startup costs, location and neighborhood, zoning regulations, banking, criminal background. What have we done to make sure that there's equity in each one of those areas?
To make sure that That
there is equity and startup costs.
Yep.
Yeah, all those areas. If there were challenges to participation, then if there are challenges, obviously we should be, if equity is our focus and there are challenges and barriers, then we should be trying to deal with those challenges and barriers with an equity.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're having this conversation now and why, they're listed there.
Okay, well then I'll move on. So what are the biggest barriers to employment in the cannabis industry? What is the pay level? Does it meet Denver's minimum wage requirement? Are they living wages? I mean, that would be an interesting question. And then on the other side, training is a required skill. Who will do that training? If in fact we get all those things in place. I'll move on. What are the biggest barriers to ownership in the cannabis industry? If we have on the left-hand side all of those as identified barriers, and I think Candy was correct when she said who's identifying those barriers, how can these barriers be addressed if they're being recommended by someone else and not by the folks who are supposedly caught up in the restrictions and the barriers not being the barriers being there for them? One. And then on the other side, can the access to the startup capital, what is the discussion internally? Has there been discussion, or is it our purpose to recommend that the marijuana tax dollars or dollars from the industry be utilized as a source of revenue to help make sure that the equity dilemma, i.e. access to capital, is being dealt with? And then lastly, what would help advance employment opportunities and career opportunities in the industry? Who would provide this training? And then the industry consortium and the workforce development, has there been some collaborative conversation going on? If we know that these are barriers, this would be very helpful because the report told many of us something we already know. The report told some of us that didn't know, enlightened us. And I think that what this does is lets us know that we're on the right track, but we still have so much further to go. And so with that, thank you.
Great. Thank you for all those thoughts. Thank you. And then I think we had Kenneth Allison next.
Yes. Yes. Hi, this is Kenneth Allison. 2 questions. Does the city help a person find a warehouse or a storefront location? And then the second question is, you said money's given to schools. What's the criteria for that? Is it location, student need, or student numbers that go into the criteria of giving a certain amount?
So I'll address that one first, and then I'll come back to your second one. So we don't give money to schools, like the school district themselves. What the city does with our funding, because the city actually is not, schools are not within our financial responsibility. None of our taxes and stuff go there. That's all property taxes. And so what we do is we give our funding, we set up a grant program through our Office of Children's Affairs, and we fund after school or summer programs. And so whether that's a program through the Boys and Girls Club, or DPS actually does run some summer programs and after school programs that have received some of this funding. So they look at the areas within the city that are underserved or have low opportunities for these types of programs. And that's how they kind of allocate their funding, is they look at one of those criteria. That's one of the criteria they look at to allocate their funding.
Okay.
And then your first question was around, does the city assist with finding locations?
Yes.
We don't. We have our guidelines and our rules out there, but we can't provide that legal advice on what locations would be eligible. However, there is some assistance that can be used by contacting our department, but we don't help any businesses find locations that are available.
Okay, thank you. Fair enough.
Yep. So was there anybody else in the queue? Michelle, I think did you have a question, Michelle, or no? No? Okay. So before we move on to the next discussion questions, I think there has been some recent things that have changed or happening at the state legislature during this very shortened time period that they're back in session. And so Ian, I thought maybe you could do a quick update or summary of some changes that are happening at the legislature, probably as we speak.
I would be delighted to. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to do this. So I'll be brief. I don't want to take up too much time. Obviously, we have a lot to cover today, but as many of, or probably everybody on this call is aware, last year our General Assembly enacted Senate Bill 224, which was regulating, it was the sunset for regulated marijuana. And that had all kinds of things in there for the state licensing authority at the Department of Revenue to do. And one of the items within that bill was to create and implement what became known as the Accelerator Program beginning here in July. And so that allowed for, it extended the program to retail marijuana cultivation and retail marijuana products manufacturing, those licensees to allow activities to occur, which would allow for those licenses to host and offer technical and capital support to accelerator, what is known currently as accelerator licensees. And so the current definition of an accelerator licensee is somebody who resides in an opportunity zone as designated by the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. And I'll go ahead for those who can see the chat at least. I will put this link into the chat, so when you want to, you can look and see what the opportunity zone map looks like. Recognize this is it's a broad general definition. So I'll go on to say, so as part of the rulemaking process that we had, the Marijuana Enforcement Division had stakeholder work group sessions, as they do for virtually all legislation. But it was done specifically to solicit feedback on the rules for the accelerator program itself. And it was, I think, very clear that the way that it was done was a pretty dynamic way of doing stakeholding based on what I've seen in the past from the Enforcement Division. It took a whole different meaning, all these different multiple breakout sessions at the same time. And it was very clear from those conversations that stakeholders wanted the program to expand beyond just persons residing in an opportunity zone. And to go on and further say that, in conversations with a lot of the stakeholders behind the original language, they said quite purposefully that, it was intended to be a stakeholder or a placeholder, pardon me, in some capacity, and that the broad definition of residing in an opportunity zone wasn't necessarily what they were looking to accomplish. And truth be told, in fact, it is very, very broad and allows for a lot of people to qualify that I don't think was the intention of original stakeholders behind it. So as a result, there was this very broad definition. And so there was a group of stakeholders, and I'm happy to share, at least on the fact sheet that was presented to the legislature, many of the people are actually on this call and a part of this working group, which speaks to bringing some of the right people to these conversations. But Sarah Woodson and The Color of Cannabis, Wanda James and Simply Pure, NAACP, Artway and Equitable Consulting, John Bailey and the Black Cannabis Equity Initiative, Larissa Bolivar and the Cannabis Consumers Coalition were all stakeholders in working on this bill and bringing it forward. And some conversations were had with the governor's office and with the Marijuana Enforcement Division and some other relevant agencies briefly. And so where we're at is that there's a bill now that was introduced only on Tuesday of this week. I'll get into that here in a moment. And it replaces the accelerator licensee with a social equity licensee. And I want to be clear, this is to create a definition only currently, but it's going to allow for a broader application of the social equity license. And what this is going to do is going to add additional criteria beyond just the opportunity zone. I see Sarah smiling. She's been intimately involved in this. So a person who wants to be considered a social equity licensee must meet these criteria. 1, they have to be a Colorado resident. 2, they've not been the beneficial owner of a license subject to disciplinary or legal action that resulted in revoking a license, meaning that if they're currently a licensee or at one time was a licensee, if they lost their license because of disciplinary or legal action, they may not be suitable for this. And they've demonstrated at least one of the following, and this was an important piece of this bill, is that they resided for at least 15 years between 1980 and 2010 in a census tract that was designated by the Office of Economic Development and International Trade as an opportunity zone. So it's for these certain years, rather than just living there for 5 years. It increased the time in which somebody needed to live there. And Sarah can speak to the reasons why 1980 to 2010 was chosen, but it has to do with heightened focus on the war on drugs during some of the peak years of what I think we all have come to understand as very targeted and selective prosecutions and convictions. The second piece is that they need to be designated in a disproportionate impacted area. And that's going to be defined by rule and through some rulemaking that we plan to do. Another one is that the applicant or the applicant's immediate family, their parent, their legal guardian, their sibling, their spouse, their child, or a minor in their guardianship was arrested for a marijuana offense or convicted of a marijuana offense or was subject to civil asset forfeiture related to a marijuana investigation. And those who have played an intimate role, virtually everybody on this call as well, I think understands that civil asset forfeiture is it's a terrible piece of the war on drugs, and a lot of people suffered as a result of that. You know, aside from just convictions and arrests. Another qualifier is that the applicant's household income in the year prior to application did not exceed an amount determined by the rule of the state licensing authority. And what's interesting about that is what was originally offered up was a much wider, salary range that would allowed for more people with higher incomes to qualify. And so we in the governor's office asked the proponents to go look at this so that I think it would be more meaningful to them as stakeholders who are looking to push this forward, and to make it a little bit more restrictive. Then finally, the social equity licensee, or collectively one or more of the licensees together in any group, holds at least 51% of the beneficial ownership of the regulated marijuana business. We want to make sure, we've seen examples in other states, and there's plenty of anecdotal and real information to support that in many cases, social equity licensees have effectively been taken advantage of by people looking to support them with capital contributions or whatnot that effectively take away their ownership. And so we want to make sure that they maintain at least 51% of the beneficial ownership. So the bill provides that a person applying, this is also really important, people that apply under the social equity license criteria can't be denied a license solely on the basis of a marijuana conviction. So right now, if you've had, it used to be 10 years and then it dropped down to 5 years and now it's 3 years, that if you have a felony conviction, you cannot qualify. And so we are within this bill, it's removing the restriction that if that conviction is marijuana related, it will not be the sole basis for a denial. And it's especially meaningful knowing that many people for marijuana convictions are preventing disenfranchised people from getting involved in the marijuana industry. And as the survey that you just provided, Molly, I think it said like 83% of owners suggested that convictions is a challenge to getting into the industry, and almost 17% of employees. But it speaks to the wide berth of the difference of ownership and employees, and the fact that 85% of people are responding, recognizing that marijuana convictions is a silly reason to not be able to participate in the industry. So this bill presents an opportunity to create a broader social equity program now through the accelerator program, but ideally providing some additional paths to participants who have encountered various barriers to entry into the industry. And the last thing that I want to say is, there are we know that there are local jurisdictions that have been waiting in some capacity for the state. Denver has suggested in these meetings that hospitality and delivery is something that that there is an opportunity to make these available for social equity licensees. And ideally, if this definition has an opportunity to make it through the legislature this session, it will create a basis for any local jurisdiction that wants to look at the state for statute for a possible consideration. And very briefly, I'll tell you, this got introduced. This is almost like a 101 on how to pass a bill in 3 days currently. It was introduced on Tuesday. It was heard in committee yesterday morning. It then went to a second committee last night. Then this morning, it went into the House. Representative James Coleman led this in the House, and it passed 45-19 with one absent. And now it's just waiting to be read for final before it then gets turned over to the Senate. And it's been passed unamended thus far through all of these committees. And so the governor's been supportive of it. He's said that he's supportive of it. And we're looking forward to seeing this passed. And if it passes, he will most certainly sign it. So there's a high level overview. I hope I didn't take too long. It's taken 10 years to get here, so explaining it over a period of 5 or 6 minutes seems entirely reasonable.
No.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for all that information.
And can I just say I've not had an opportunity to confer with all the stakeholders that have been a part of this, and I know that there's a lot of people in this meeting that have been in touch with our stakeholders. Some have been working with the governor's office directly. And I just want to say thank you to the proponents and to the people that are working on this, specifically the people that are on this call, have played a very meaningful role in the conversation in many instances. It's been a long, ongoing conversation for somebody who's been involved in different capacities for close to a decade in the legal industry here in Colorado. It's been a conversation for a long time. And so from the governor's office, we want to say thank you to the proponents and to the stakeholders that have been engaged in this process. And the fact that able to find consensus between a lot of very passionate people on this issue who ultimately went as far as putting their name on this bill as stakeholders to see this moving forward, I think is meaningful and speaks to the work that that we're doing in groups like this and at the state level and at the enforcement division. And I just want to thank you all for being passionate and taking the time to work with us, because it took everybody to get to where we are today.
Great.
I'll shut up now. Thanks, Molly.
So Sarah or Sean or anybody, we'll just spend a couple more minutes on it. You guys want to chime in at all? I know you guys have all put a lot of work into this and have been key in keeping this moving, especially in this very, very short time frame. So anything you want to add?
Well, sure. Yeah. Of course, I'm very happy for the progress that we've made. The biggest takeaway from this is I just want, to make it clear, like, there's no gatekeepers when it comes to social equity and social justice and economic justice. And when you're focusing on creating new policy to change policy that is rooted in systematic racism, it has to be a collaborative effort. And there was collaboration across the board with stakeholders and industry as well. And so there's been support. The conversations have been hard. The one thing that our organization, of course, we're the new people and we're reminded of that all the time. But, sometimes it takes that new blood to get things going and to bring the conversation together. And, it's important to have money. It's important to have power. But for the color of cannabis, our currency was respect. And we really made sure strategically that when we engaged with existing stakeholders and industry, we came from a respectful place so that we could find neutrality to make sure that everyone was in agreement with it. So thank you to everyone. And I'm happy. And we'll see. Onward we go.
Great. All right, well said. And with that, I think we'll jump into the first question here of the day. Okay. Let me just quickly share the presentation. Oh yeah, you want to go ahead, Art?
Yeah, congrats to everybody involved. We were all part of the marijuana enforcement division stakeholder process for this, and so in Senate Bill 224 and the original accelerator program was set to start to take applications for licenses at what time? January of next year, or?
It was originally set for July 1st of this year.
Okay, and so things have been pushed back due to the passage or if 1424 passes, and we all hope it does, it'll be pushed back until January?
That's correct. It would be pushed back until January 1st of next year.
Okay, and that's primarily just to deal with that disproportionate impact area definition and figuring, because that's really the only new thing that the marijuana enforcement division has to work on, right? Is that
it would be that and the income levels as well would be the two things that would be mandated through rule.
Okay, so yeah, 6 months I guess isn't too bad. I was going to be upset if it was a year.
It's not a year, and in fact, it'll actually coincide with the beginning of retail delivery. And so, the opportunity to do this and not allow, I know one of the big conversations was perhaps allowing people to get a head start in new licenses. This will enable this type of license to go at the same time that everybody else does. not giving a head start to businesses that have been working on this for a while, and so ideally to create a more even playing field.
Sounds good. Thanks. I look forward to taking part in the stakeholder discussion this time around as well.
I appreciate all the work that you've done all these past many years, from your work at the Drug Policy Alliance to starting your own consulting firm and working with so many. You know, you've been a big part of this for many years.
I appreciate that, and shout out to Sean and shout out to Sarah for, you know, taking the ball and taking it over the finish line. Great work there. Appreciate it.
All right, so we'll jump in now to that first discussion question, which I think is, here we go. Okay, so the first question, we just want to talk about kind of laying the stage and ask some questions around current state and future state. So around the current state, you know, we've talked about the new social equity license at the state, identified some of these challenges and inequities. The study that we just went over that from the city, that the city commissioned last year, we just went over some of those, but just want to hear from you all what your input is on what some of the current inequities are within the cannabis industry. And then looking forward, developing a cannabis equity program, what would success look like and what should be our goals of a cannabis social equity program? So looking at some of those considerations around what are the inequitable barriers to entry, knowing that we have a lack of diversity and inclusion in the cannabis industry, knowing that there have been long lasting impacts from the war on drugs and several other considerations. Just want to open up that discussion to all of you around with that current and future state. So who would like to kick that large question off?
Well, let me, is it John Bailey?
Yep, go ahead, John.
You know, I sent out a document to some of you, I guess, over the last couple of days. And one of the things that I mentioned is that the fact is that we don't know what equity looks like as a society because we've never actually had it. And so, to me, part of this is experiential. If you haven't gone through some of the things that Black folks have gone through or brown folks have gone through, then many of you are sort of drinking from a well that you didn't dig. And so it's going to be important, and this goes back to a point that Candy raised earlier. If you don't have folks who have gone through the experience telling you what the experience is and telling you what the barriers and the racism is and feels like, and I know you say, well, that's why we're having this meeting. But if in fact we're having this meeting and we don't know what success or equity looks like, and yet some of us who've had this experience are telling you this is what it looks like, this is how you move in that direction, and then to be 8 years and $8 billion later asking this question, while it's late and it's somewhat disingenuous, it is the question of the day. But I'm just hoping that those of us who think you know what social equity is come to grips with the fact that you don't, and that we have some serious and authentic discussions around not always waiting on legislation, but what are the day-to-day things that we could be doing, which I've been talking to y'all about consistently for the last couple of meetings and for the last 5 or 6 months, because there are things that we can do today that have nothing to do with the legislation. And success and equity can look like folks sitting down in a good social dialogue, talk about how we can exchange opinions and ideas, how we can exchange, relationships relative to being able to get things done. So when we do this, I think that it's going to be very important just not to get caught up on what you think success looks like, but dealing with some folks who've actually had that experience. And then if you take a look around at what's going on now that they actually started with, these Black folks in the street and these young white folks in the street are not necessarily complaining because they just feel like it. There's been something that caused this to happen. And so for us to be here at this point having this conversation, I would like to make sure that we're really authentic and not talking about social equity under disguise of social expansion for some of us who are in the industry who want to get another dispensary or another store, that we really talk about genuine relationships. And that's not going to happen just out of this work group. It's going to be long term, and it's going to be demonstrated by people having relationships that folks can see and can measure, because you have to be able to operationalize equity and you have to be able to measure it.
Great, thank you. Those are some good thoughts to get us started. Anybody else want to chime in?
Yes, we have Jacqueline with a question, then we have Sarah Woodson with a comment.
Okay, go ahead, Jackie.
Hi, I certainly can't speak to John's point of what equity feels like, or the validity of the people who contributed to the survey that you started off the meeting with. But what seemed the most prominent thing in that survey, and I am just assuming from all the things that we have experienced, is that capital is a real blockage here. So what can be done? What is the state or the city doing to make access to capital for social equity applicants?
Great, yeah, thank you. And I think that'll be a question that comes up later around what can we do to create that access to capital. So, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely. So what does it look like moving forward? The Color of Cannabis, we now have about 38 members. And what we think that needs to happen on a large scale, but what we're doing with our organization is starting from every level. So, how can we help you get badged? How can we help you to understand how to run a cannabis business? And when it comes to industry, that is so important. And right now we are rolling out a 10-week course at a workstation or at a brick and mortar that we have on 2850 Welton. We have the support of Terrapin Care Station to come in there and mentor people. We have Native Roots, we have Good Chemistry, we have Lightshade. And so those people will come in and do some high level mentorship on how do you start a business? What does 280E look like? Also, we are now part of Marijuana Industry Group, which is extremely important because they are, the most powerful industry group. So we want to make sure that we're hearing from them and we're getting their feedback so that when we're, getting people prepared and ready to participate in the industry, they have a broad scale of how that works and how that looks. One of the things also is Wanda James and her lobbyist is Samantha Walsh. Wanda had proposed a funding program, and so that will definitely be a high focus that we will be supporting as well next year when it comes to legislation, to talk about what can happen with funding on a state level. So of course, capital is the biggest part, but you still need the basic training and experience because running a business is hard, let alone a cannabis business, which is extremely regulated. So those are some of the type of things that we're putting forward to get people prepared.
Great, thank you. Do we have anybody else next up in the queue?
No, unless somebody wants to talk now.
Yeah, so if you can't read the comment, I just wanted to insert, this is Councilwoman Sedevaca, that I agree with Mr. Bailey. I think that we have a clear data, we have information that we know is deficient. They strongly discouraged us from even using the data that they've put forward as a representative sample. And so I think moving forward with the assumptions that we have from a insufficient study and a group that is not representative of people who are excluded, I think we have some major challenges if we're going to use this group to jump to conclusions about what equity should look like.
So what would you recommend then? I mean,
I think you need a stakeholder process. I think you need to get people who are not involved. I've got over 40 people watching this that would love to be asking questions and participating and inserting their voice who have no opportunity to do that?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, we were happy to meet and talk with any of those folks. So, please send us your contact information to marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. We'll set up separate individual meetings with you. We can schedule a separate stakeholder work group if you have a network, councilwoman, that you would like to set up a separate conversation with. We're happy to. This is going to be a continuous process. This is not the beginning and it's not the end. And so we're looking forward to continuing gathering this dialogue. And even once we do develop a program, I mean, as we move forward with proposing what a program looks like, it's going to involve a ton of stakeholder outreach to get to developing that program and implementing that program. And then still we'll have continuous improvement for years and years to come. So yeah, please connect us with that network of people if you'd like us to reach out to them. And I mean,
that's the important part that we should go into next is you just said that there's going to be a robust stakeholder engagement process that informs this program. And so maybe you can take the opportunity to describe to us what your plan is for that robust stakeholder engagement process.
Sure. So, I mean, just based off what we've done with other programs that have moved through the ordinance process or the legislative process, once we actually develop a proposal and are ready to put it out there, we can hold meetings with RNOs. We can hold meetings with different association groups, with any type of network of stakeholders that anybody would like to get us in touch with. For a bill that passed, I believe in the fall of 2019 that we had been working on for over 2 years. We went out to several different community groups and probably did 24 informational sessions with different groups. And it was all, sometimes it was based on outreach that we did to RNO. Sometimes it was based on a request that we got to come to a specific group and provide information to. So, I mean, we will be as robust as we possibly can, and we'll always turn to you all as our for guidance on who we're missing and what we're, some additional people that we could be talking to. And
so what just described to me is an inequitable approach to stakeholder engagement. We know that RNOs are not representative of the communities that they're in, and often the communities we're trying to reach they don't even have a single RNO representing their areas. And so that is and you've also just said that once there is a proposal, you will take it out to groups to respond to, and a predetermined outcome to respond to is not equity.
So we don't, an RNO.
Hold on a second. Councilwoman DeBaca, do you have, it sounds like this is something that's very passionate. Do you have a suggestion for us here? I think that would be good if you got something in mind.
Absolutely. I think we need to open this up. We have never even had a public comment session on one of these meetings. And so I think that we need to get the information out there to people for these meetings and have a public comment session on here where we're collecting ideas, have a survey where we're oversampling people who are excluded from the industry so that we're getting the information about barriers from the people who have been excluded, not from people who are already in there.
So just to clarify, the RNO outreach that I was referring to was an example. It wasn't the only form of outreach that we would be doing, but it is an example of one mechanism we have to reach out to different communities. So we have different ways to do that. And again, would love all of your input from everybody, because you all have, if we look at our networks, they'll spread quickly. And so if people, right now we don't have a proposal, it's not a predetermined outcome at the moment. We're looking for that input right now. And hopefully by the time we conclude this work group and move on to the next step before a proposal is developed, we'll be able to hold some type of in-person session that could gather public input. That was the goal originally. This scenario, this online virtual platform is not ideal and not what we would have liked to have done. We know it doesn't warrant the best way to provide feedback. But again, if people have additional input that they want to provide towards development of a proposal for a program, provide public comments to that marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. And if you want to have an individual or group conversation with us around that, you can put that request into that same email, and we're always happy to do that. So,
Molly?
Yep.
We have, John, just a second, because we have Clarissa and Sarah on the queue.
Okay, go ahead, Clarissa.
Hi, Clarissa with National Cannabis Industry Association. So when we look at the data, there's no doubt that capital is one of the most pressing issues here. I think everyone is in agreement with that. I wonder, because we also could be looking at expense reduction, because when you look at the cost of regulation and some of these, the complexity of the regulations that people face, I wonder if the city has asked questions about, could we potentially also lower some of these costs attached to regulatory requirements? Examples being, for example, Metric. Metric is a clear example of some very, very expensive, anyway, some pretty hefty expenses that they have to deal with that everyone really deals with. But as we look at social equity, could we affect that by looking also at these costs for applicants?
Okay, that's a good point. So we had Sarah, and then we'll go back to John quickly.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Councilwoman was speaking to, that has been a frustration that I've had. Where are all the Black people? Where are all the Hispanic people when you're creating these policies? And I think one of the things that John Bailey has been very amazing at is bringing people together. So I think that possibly offline, Councilwoman Sitabaca, Mr. Bailey, Larissa's, like all of the stakeholders, Wanda James, everyone that's been participating, maybe we can come up with some type of survey. Maybe we can come up with some type of broad collaborative stakeholder engagement so that we can bring enough Black and brown people to the table and get their opinions on some of these barriers, because all of us have amazing networks, and the way to reach the most people is when we're doing things in collaboration with each other. So I think, those are some of the things that we can do moving forward to make sure that everyone is a part of it. And for the 40 people listening online, if this bill passes and we have stakeholder engagement in January, you have got to be involved. When we were having the stakeholder engagement earlier, or last year and this year for the accelerator program, there were literally like 4 to 5 Black people in the room. Now, whether or not if they knew or not, I don't know. And you just don't know what you do not know. But if we're talking about solution-based things moving forward, it's our responsibility, if we're going to say that we're representing our communities in cannabis, that we're collectively working together to reach all networks, to get enough opinions from all people that look like us. So, just some comments on things we can do moving forward. Thank you.
Great, yeah, excellent point. And we are, like I said, we're happy to reach out to those groups. I know Ashley has been very involved with John and the Black Cannabis Equity Initiative. So, any additional participation that you guys are looking for from us now or down the road, we're happy to participate in that. And I know we appreciated a lot when you all helped us distribute the survey and reached out to your networks, filled us, provided us input and feedback on those survey questions, and helped us out with that. Again, we're always looking to do more, and we know we can always do better. So appreciate your help and guidance along that. John, did you have another thought?
Yeah, picking up on the doing more and doing better conversation, and going back to the robust conversation that you and Candy were talking about. I think the Councilwoman's point of being able to bring folks together is critical. And I think Sarah just hit it. And I want to suggest that since ultimately this will go before council, I would like to encourage the councilwomen, Black and DeBaca, as well as Hines, to see if they can convince their council colleagues to have something like these conversations in each one of their districts. One. 2, use it as an opportunity to talk about turnover, a new leaf, and also use it as a recruiting to be able to help deal with expungement. We have a unique opportunity here And I think that if we leave it all here in the work group, we're doing ourselves a disservice. And if these council folks are willing to call these meetings and work with stakeholders and have these types of conversations, I think Sarah's point has legs. But I think overall, if we can have these conversations in these councilmatic districts, when ultimately the council people will have to vote on what we come up with, then we end up with a win-win and value added throughout the process.
Yep. Great. Any other comments from anybody around the current state, around the current inequities within the industry and our future state around what we should be setting as some goals? Or do we want to move on? Move on? Oh, go ahead.
I wonder how the goals are going to be received when you have representation from the industry on this group, and where outsiders might be asking for a revenue stream that is created by the current members of the industry. It might not be something that the industry currently wants because they already feel overtaxed. And so if outsiders are saying access to capital is our top priority, and we need you all to create an impact fee or a revenue stream of some sort to create that capital for us to access this space, there's a tension that I'm wondering how we're going to be able to resolve when the decision makers on the call are already involved in the industry.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and I think that's one of the important questions that I would love to hear from today and, you know, going forward. And there's more than just industry members here in this conversation. So I think we can kind of address that tension and that conflict today and hear from both sides of the perspective. So we'll go ahead and move into the next question then. Sorry, I know it takes me a couple minutes to share my slides, but we'll get there.
Hey, Molly, this is Ashley. But can you go back to that slide? And do we have any additional input from this group on those specific questions? Because does anybody else, does anybody on the phone call want to tell us as a work group member, what does success look like and what should be the goals of this program?
I would love to tell you that.
Yeah, please.
So when we look at who was criminalized by the war on drugs.
I'm sorry, who is this?
This is Councilwoman Sedebaca.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
When we look at the disproportionate criminalization of Black and brown people during the war on drugs, and we now have a multi-billion-dollar industry of white men, I think that you should have had the same proportion of Black and brown people running the industry. That's what success would have looked like to me.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump right in here with you. As I mentioned before, I asked the question, what have we been doing with looking at other cities and states? And, you know, to me, everything appears in our state to be focused on those who had early entry and then a recognition of those who've been left out in the war on drugs. And I think that what we ought to be doing is looking at multiple areas of entry, from ownership to management to war on drugs, or folks who are looking to get in the entry level, as well as folks who are looking to change careers. I think that there are multiple ways of being able to go at that, and that's one. If we have revoked licenses here, that's another way of being able to look at whether or not success can be reached through social equity by making those revoked licenses available. If we want to go about trying to come up with the issue of capital, why not come up with a capital fund using revenue and hoping the industry will buy in? But then beyond that success, I'm not sure if we don't have the budget to be able to do everything that we're talking about, if we're going to be able to realize significant success. We may be able to come up with some tangible success, but what about significant success? And significant success to me is to be able to come up with something based on this conversation that will allow us to be sustainable as we build capacity. And I'm saying we're going to need a cannabis control commission that doesn't put all this work on excise and license, that may allow a platform that has a budget and some staff to be able to do some of the multiplicity of questions and answers and resolutions and programs and initiatives that have to take place so that this becomes authentic and not just, you know, a token something that everybody feels somewhat good about, but everybody under their breath is complaining about.
Quick question. This is Erica from Excise, and I'm just asking from a note-taking perspective, both to Councilwoman Cedabaka and Mr. Bailey, who just spoke. Do you have any sort of measurable, you know, benchmarkers or goals that?
Great question. Great question. Great question to me, at least to me. For those of you, if you go to the Black Cannabis Equity Initiative website and you go under programs and you go to the first paragraph under the programs, you'll see a equity report card. The way, because I don't think the industry has the will after 8 years and $8 billion and we still haven't dealt with the program, I'm not sure that the will is there. There are good people in the industry, but I'm not sure that the will is there. And so in other industries, be it in hotel, be it in beverage, be it in newspaper, what we've done is develop a report card. And I think that if we develop a report card in this environment dealing with ownership, members of your board, employees, vendor relationship, media buys, community investment, we'll be able to see and measure whether or not an owner-operator in the industry is doing good social equity work. And it has nothing to do with legislation. See, my point is these are things that you can do right now, irregardless of legislation. The question is, does the industry have the will, and do we have, and I think we do, have the resources to be able to put in front of industry and educate them and create a bridge so they can get to what it is that they want to get to, and that's a demonstration of a commitment to social equity. So yes, Erica, I clearly have a measure.
Same, and I think if we have in Denver a little under 1,000 licenses, and you had Black people during the war on drugs making up 49% of the arrests for drugs, or if you had Black people being 74% of the people sent to prison for the war on drugs, then 74% of that ownership of those 1,000 licenses should be Black people.
Thank you for those clarifications. We'll put those in the notes. Thank you.
Yeah, I have an answer to Ashley's question as well.
Sorry, Art, I'm sorry. Sarah was in the queue. Can it be Sarah and then you? Is that okay?
Yeah, I thought that was an old comment from Sarah. Yeah, no problem.
And Art, you can go if you like. You can go first. I don't mind.
Well, I was just going to say, I think success from a reality-based perspective on what we have right now to work with, you know, I think we can spend a lot of time talking about how to make it better. But the fact is, we do have some opportunities right now. The door has been cracked open. So success for me is really finding a few good people in the industry. It's just like those Marine commercials. You know, we're looking for a few good people. We're looking for a few good people to have the goodwill, like Coach Bailey talked about, to engage with the opportunities that are there right now. I also think from a policy perspective, success looks like the city of Denver potentially using the state definition of social equity, or maybe even expanding on it, to overlay that across all of the opportunities that are now available when it comes to transportation, accelerator program, hospitality. And then I think we'll probably get to a 60 to 70% clip, like what Councilman Cedabaka just mentioned, when it comes to the percentage of the new licenses actually being social equity applicants and people coming from the community that we're trying to help. So, you know, I think stakeholder development and involvement is always necessary. but we have to look at where we are right now and how can we use these cracks that we've been able to open up the last couple of years and make sure that our community engagement is really focused on this is how you can get involved right now. So, you know, I just don't want us to put the perfect in front of the good and ignore the opportunities that we have right now. And I think a lot of the stakeholder development and community education should be focused on getting people involved in the opportunities that we have now.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Did you have something still?
We have
Yeah, I
Sarah
was
and then
just
Sean
gonna-
Coleman.
Okay.
Sarah Woodson, Color Cannabis. Actually, Art took some of those, you know, what I was going to say. Number one, I think legislation and policy is extremely important because that is why we're in this position that we're in right now. So having some definitions on a state level is going to be extremely important, and then being able to implement those on a city level. We know that we have new licenses types coming. We have hospitality, we have delivery, making sure that a portion of those licenses are going to social equity people from a workforce development and inclusion, making sure that we have more people that are in the workforce. And then from an ancillaries perspective, I wasn't able to get on the call that John did, but I heard that he had introduced some people that are African-American that do security and electric, and, you know, so having those type of services as well. Will we ever get to a space where 74% of licenses are acquired by Black people or Hispanic people? No, because the numbers do not support that. But exactly what Art was saying is that moving forward in the new licenses, we can get to a space where we see more, where the numbers will support more business ownership that are owned by Black and brown people. So those would be some of my tangibles. And then the last one of the things that Wanda had brought up earlier on was looking at distressed properties in cannabis. So that kind of piggybacks on what John was saying about revoked licenses and distressed properties. I think that is a great opportunity as well. And then one of the things that Ian did not mention is that if the bill passes, the accelerator now would open up to have a franchise type of model. So that's another opportunity for industry to be able to come in and work with people in that franchise type of model. And franchising models have brought a lot of economic impact to African American and Hispanic communities. So that is also a new opportunity.
Great, thank you. Sean?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have spoken to having reasonable expectations, right? Because that's important. You don't want to set yourself up in a situation where no matter how well you do, you fail. But I also think it's important that we're talking about what we want the future to look like, that we're not assuming that we have a better future and have kept all the mistakes of the past. That doesn't make any sense. Right. So I think in the short term, certainly, I think you can measure success by if an entrepreneur has an idea, they have a pathway to affect that idea, whether that's in management, whether that's in ownership, whether it's in employment, whatever it is, that if a person has an idea, that their history before that day isn't the barrier to why they can't get to their future. That is how you measure success in the short term. I think the way you measure success in the long term is that you don't need this sort of thing anymore, right? Because you need whether it's in this industry, whether it's in education, whether it's affordable housing, whatever it is, all of these programs are symptoms of a disease that you have. And if you continue to have disease, and that means why you continue the program. So what you want is to someday go into remission, where you've balanced the general societal scales, so that way anybody who wakes up in the morning who has something they feel like doing can go out and try and do that and succeed on their own merits without either the help or hindrance of their parents. So I think that's how you measure success in the long term. But of course, in short term, in order to get there, you do need to start creating those communities and those wealth within those communities. So that, you know, that's when you're talking about equity, we have to remember that equity and equality are different words.
Yep. Great. Thank you. So I think some of the conversations we have in the next couple of slides will kind of dig in a little bit, and so maybe we can return at the end to the same question to talk about, you know, to come back to what does success look like. So I'm still sharing. Yep. So I'll go on to the next one then, I think. There we go. Okay, so the next question that we want to discuss with all of you is what that criteria for determining eligibility of an equity applicant, what that looks like. And so, you know, this was developed, these slides were developed in ancient times, which was 1 week ago. But as of 1 week ago, the bill that's now moving forward hadn't been introduced yet. So now, but we do have the currently existing statutory definition of an accelerator licensee, which is a person who has resided in a census tract designated by the Office of Economic Development and International Trade (OEDIT) as an opportunity zone for 5 out of the 10 years prior to application and has not previously held a license. We know that there's possible state legislation to modify that definition that Ian and Sarah and everybody have been hard at work on and addressed earlier in the discussion. So we know what those possible changes are that are coming. Some other jurisdictions have used some different language around income, residence in certain neighborhoods, police districts, zip codes, individual or family history of marijuana arrests and convictions. And then we also know that from other jurisdictions, they have seen some legal challenges when they've implemented different criteria for equity applicants. And that have resulted in financial burdens or licensing delays for those equity applicants. And so we'd like to, of course, avoid that as well. So just want to see, knowing everything that the language that's in the new proposed bill, and what's out there currently for the accelerator licensee. Is there anything different that Denver should be doing when we're determining that eligibility for equity applicants?
Can you click back to that?
Oh, sure. Yep. There we go. Can you see it?
Yes.
Anybody have any thoughts?
We're on the equity applicant criteria.
Yep.
So John Bailey,
right.
then Jackie.
All right. So at the very bottom, it says legal challenges which can result in financial burdens or licensing delays. Do we have, someone give us, maybe even Ian, 3 or 4 what these legal challenges might be?
So anybody else is happy to jump into if they know more about this, but just quickly, we have seen in other areas, both other jurisdictions that have implemented an equity program, as well as other areas outside of marijuana, where legal challenges have been presented as far as what the right criteria are, and whether they can be race-based or whether they can be, whether you have been impacted by the war on drugs. And so just want to keep those as a consideration while we're thinking about what those criteria would be and making sure that there's something that could withhold legal challenges.
This goes back to something I said at the last meeting about the pros and cons. Some of these questions, you have to be able to see the pros and cons, because just putting the word legal challenge down, if we don't ask the question, we're either assuming or we're acting like we know, or we're just sitting here not knowing and maybe wanting to know, but reluctant to ask. And so, again, I think that it's important to try to have some pros and cons on some of this stuff. down the road, or when we finally finish up everything. I mean, that would be very helpful, I'm telling you.
Okay.
So I have a question. Well, first of all, opportunity zones are development based and they're not inclusive of historically Black areas. Currently in Denver, they're inclusive of historically Latino areas. And it doesn't include all of our neighborhoods that have the disproportionate concentration of the marijuana industry. So I would add affected by a disproportionate concentration of the industry into that. I also feel like there is an equity study, so you can use race explicitly since you've identified a racial disparity. And so I think race should absolutely be called out in the definition.
Okay.
We have Jackie in queue, but I think Sarah wants to comment on Sidbaka's. Correct, Sarah? And if that's okay with you, Jackie, can I pull her in front of you?
Of course.
And your audio is off, Sarah.
All right, thank you. Sarah, what's in the color of cannabis? Yes, and just to kind of piggyback off what Councilwoman said, she was one of the people that we definitely wanted input on from the definitions on a state level. And so the state definitions put in that disproportionate impacted area because you did point that out, and I was very grateful for that, that when we looked at that map on opportunity zones, you would think that a 5 Points or, East Side would be opportunity zone, or even Park Hill, but they're not representative of that. And so that's why on a state level, we focused on getting that window of time and place. And when I've been talking to other states that are working on this, one of the things that they continue to say is that is really important and a consideration that they hadn't taken into because a lot of states and cities are going through a gentrification process. So what Councilwoman Sidabaka said is extremely important, and hopefully the state definitions get passed because that is in the state definition. Also, just really quick with legal challenges, the main legal challenges that you'll see across the board, and I do hope that on our last call, we can do that pros and cons, and we can get a spreadsheet. And I know Bia has one up, so you guys probably just need to update it, but it lays out every program and the criteria. And one of the biggest legal challenges is making the criteria go to race-based only. That has been the biggest legal challenge. And so the states that have done that, they've had people sue them. And then the 2 or 3 people that actually were ready to start their business, they could not because they were now caught up in a legal battle, whether or not if you can say that in order to get these licenses, you need to be Black or Hispanic. And so that's why the definitions have to be focused on those disproportionate impacted areas and those convictions, because that's supposed to capture a lot of those neighborhoods, people, and communities. Thank you.
And I hear that at the state level, but I think the precursor for racialized policy at the local level is a disparity study. And we have information showing a very distinct disparity along racialized lines. And so it's no different than affirmative action policy. You could get challenged for it, but it's not the only thing that you're calling out, and it would stand up in a court of law because there is a disparity study that shows specifically disparities along race.
And this is John Bailey. I think, Councilwoman, you are absolutely correct. If we go at it from that angle, we'll be able to not only disaggregate, but we'll be able to see exactly where the gaps are in terms of not only equity, but equality, inclusion, all of those types of things. So I think you're on the right track in terms of the questions that you're posing.
And hey, everyone, can we please respect the chat and the line for speaking? Jackie's next, and then after her, I believe it's Michelle Holin.
I apologize, Bia.
No worries at all here. This is Jackie Flug from Drizzly. I just wanted to add that as a former regulator, as everybody's discussing what the definition of equity could be, and Ian gave a really great description of the state bill, I just think it's important that there always be discretion built into this, that the regulator, the licensing agency have some discretion, because there's always going to be somebody that is some exception to this. We draw lines on neighborhoods or conviction arrest or this member of the family, and there's always going to be somebody that fits in the spirit of social equity, but maybe not in that black letter. So I think it's important that any definition always give the licensing agency discretion.
Great. And was it Michelle that had something next?
Yeah, I think Michelle Helene has a question.
Yes, hi. Michelle Helene with Denver Public Schools. I'm wondering about impacts to the city's budget and how that may impact youth marijuana prevention. And I raised that question because I think it's going to be really important to think about the balance between youth prevention as well as looking for equity for, looking for capital in terms of equity initiatives. So, you know, just wanting us to think about that balance.
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I think maybe after we'll finish this slide and then maybe the next one, then I think we'll jump to that slide around funding, because I think that's a really important piece to this conversation that I would like to make sure we address before we adjourn today. So, but while we're on this slide, let me just see if we still have Jason Moore from the Denver City Attorney's Office on the phone to see if he wants to address the previous conversation around the criteria and whether they can be race-based.
Yeah, I am here. The approach for using race for marijuana is new, and it hasn't been broadly tested. I did read one case, I think it was at Ohio, where Ohio's equity program was struck down. So that just needs to inform, whatever decisions the agencies want to make. I think there are other programs that either haven't been challenged yet or they're on the verge of being challenged and so on. So while, there could be a decision made based on current state of the law, agencies just need to make a decision on, what policy direction they want to take, and then what does the legal jeopardy look like after that.
Okay. Anything else on this eligibility criteria before we move on to the next question?
Art has a question.
Well,
yeah.
This is Art. I have a question, and I'm actually in the queue. And maybe this question is for Jason. If somebody does bring a challenge based on race-based language in a definition, whether or not it's the only criteria or one of many, does the program have to come to a halt while that challenge is being dealt with? Because if it does, I'm not sure we should leave ourselves open for somebody to essentially stall the program because we put it in specific race-based language.
Right. Most likely, yes. Most likely a plaintiff suing the city would ask the court to enjoin the program until the legal issue was resolved. So that would halt the program until the lawsuit was resolved.
Thank you. That's a risk that after we've been working on this for so long, I'm not sure I'm willing to take. I do believe the new state definition is a good bucket, but I kind of agree with Jacqueline. I think every jurisdiction can figure out if they have the right people at the table, like Councilman Sederbacher, they can figure out how to basically take the state definition, which is a nice ceiling, a nice foundation and a nice basement, and figure out how to build on it for their specific jurisdiction.
And Councilwoman Sederbacher is next.
Jason, with that Ohio case, was it exclusively race-based or did it include racial preference?
I think it had race as a criteria. I think they set a percentage of minorities to obtain licenses as part of their program, and so that particular criteria is what was struck down. That they use race as a selection criteria.
For excise and licensing, I think it would be helpful in your next presentation, since you're going to crosswalk policies in other states, to have a column that lets us know if there's been a legal challenge, and to let us know if when you're calling out what their policy is, if it's exclusively race-based or if race is one of the preferences, because I find it hard to believe that they would be able to halt a whole program that isn't exclusively race-based but includes racial preference, because we have that at the city level with minority women-owned business preferences. We have that with affirmative action. So I would be curious to know what the difference is in the court's perception of that type of program versus affirmative action or maybe goals.
Yeah, and Councilwoman, we've asked Jason that question ourselves. So Jason, can you address that, please?
Yeah, I could do it now if you want. So one big difference between the city's affirmative action program for contracting and the marijuana program is that the approach for affirmative action for contracting has been around for decades and has been tested many, many times in the courts. So Denver's program is designed around that. Denver did not invent affirmative action for programming. It borrowed from different programs around the country that had already been tested. So there's already an approach. There's a specific legal approach and legal analysis for looking at race in contracting. The other the other type of affirmative action program that's more familiar with folks is in higher education, where they use race as one factor in school admissions. So licensing tends to look like a little bit of both, but it doesn't fit squarely within one or the other. That was part of the reason why the Ohio program was struck down, because there just wasn't any nexus that the court found between, the race factors that Ohio developed for their program. It's a developing area, and I'm sure it'll be tested again and again and again until somebody figures it out, including the courts. I mean, that's something they have to figure out too.
Question for Jason here.
Sure.
Jason, based on what Candy was talking about in the affirmative action, but most of us in our evolved thinking have moved towards a disparity study because we realize that the affirmative action has become contentious. And so my question to you is, if we can frame this, if this is framed as empowering communities of color, or empowering communities that are disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, and how we do that, and using disparity studies and using equity, which is why we're having this conversation, because after affirmative action, after model cities, after the Great Society, after affirmative action, now we're at the disparity study moving forward, it's the equity study. And so if we have evolved to this point, couldn't a case be made for framing empowering communities disproportionately impacted using the disparity study as a way of being able to then move towards equity?
For communities, yes. So for example, certain zip codes or neighborhoods that have been disproportionately affected by the war on drugs and so on. And that takes some crafting. So I think other jurisdictions have done that. I think City of Oakland has stood up a program. I think a few other jurisdictions have stood up programs where they focus on areas, geographic areas or neighborhoods that have been impacted, and then, but still did not specifically call out race as a criteria. So for better or worse,
those things were really driven by, in almost all those cases, those things were driven by Black or brown council people. So it was really subliminally obvious.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for better or worse, a program like Ohio's, the court called out this one criteria based on race and struck it down on that basis. So it wasn't a wholesale dismissal of the efforts or the the positive impact of having an equity program, but going after race like that is what was a problem for Ohio, a legal problem for Ohio.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have in the report the Denver Cannabis Employment and Opportunity Report that we just released this week. There is some references about other programs. And like I said, I think it's a great idea that we dig into this a little bit at the next meeting. And so we'll get that prepared and we'll definitely make sure. I think it's also a great suggestion that we identify which ones are facing legal challenges and what the base of that legal challenge is. But within the report, there is some citations for that Ohio case and there's actually 2 cases, I believe. So I don't have the page number right in front of me right now, and I'm scared to mess with my screen while I'm sharing, but there is a citation and a couple references to that Ohio case within that report that was released. So, any other comments here? Yep.
Yep, we have one from Michelle.
Okay. Michelle Garcia?
In addition to looking at programs that are currently enjoined, because it's not just Ohio, so is LA's. They currently are not doing anything in their social equity space. It's not race related. It's actually how they implemented the rollout. But there are programs like in Massachusetts, they've had an active social equity program for 2 years and they don't have a single person who's been licensed. So when we look at programs, I think we should look not obviously just at the legal challenges, but at the efficacy overall. And then I would also caution looking at anything race related in California. They have Prop 209, which prohibits any race specific considerations inside of their application processes. So that's why they have kind of the number of workarounds and not the explicit language that you might find in Ohio. So, but my question is given that capital is identified as a barrier, why was the income threshold included in the equity applicant criteria?
Good question. Anybody intimately involved with the bill want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So, and we can kind of piggyback off of California. So California had issues with implementation. And what happened there was they were accused of corruption based on how they rolled out. Everyone had the same amount of time to put your application in. But in California, they were saying that a certain group of people had access to the portal prior. And so that was the very first problem. Then as California advocacy groups started to come around and say, well, also there's an income problem. And when we were doing community stakeholder engagement, this was brought up as well. So in California, and you can quote me on this, I believe it's $32,760 roughly right around there. And that's the income level that you cannot exceed in order to be a social equity applicant, right? So when I was working on an application in California, there was someone that made $75,000, was qualified, still lived in a disproportionate neighborhood, but couldn't apply. And so then the residents in California started to say that same thing. Well, hey, this income is too low. And when you look at all the social equity programs, they all have this extremely low income barrier. And so that stops a person that's actually in business and wants to transfer to cannabis from ever operating. So we wanted to take that into consideration, especially in our own backyard, because community members were saying we do not want income that's below poverty. So that was the first reason why. The second reason why we put income in there is because when we were discussing and having these hard conversations with industry, one of the things that, you know, industry members would bring up is, well, what about other protected classes like veterans, LGBTQ, disabled, and even in our last work group that the city put on, that was like a major point of contention. Well, what about all these other people? And so while we always want to recognize that social equity in cannabis is specifically for people that have been negatively impacted by the war on drugs, to create definitions that everyone could support, we then said, okay, well, you know, if you're a veteran and you've been negatively impacted, that's fine. But as long as you don't exceed this income, you also then can qualify for the program. And so we really wanted to put forward a race neutral policy, a race neutral set of definitions that made sure that we captured who we needed to, but we also gave other people an opportunity to participate as well. And we apparently made it too high. And so that's where the governor's office, they're like, no, you guys are too liberal on that one. And so that's when the governor's office really came in. And I was happy because, again, we were trying to create that neutral policy that works for everyone. And so the governor's office came in and said, hey, let's think about this policy with income, and that's going to be determined in rulemaking. Jordan Wellington he's not on this call, but he had brought up a really good point, and this was something that Artway and Sean were talking about too, is creating tiers. And so in rulemaking, one of the things that I think that we should really discuss if this gets through is having an income tier for people to qualify. So that's why, I hope that wasn't too much, but that's why we included income in the definitions.
Great. So I have there's several more questions that we were hoping to get to today, but there's two that are obviously we have 25 minutes left. We're not going to get through all of them. So, but there are two important ones that I do want to get to real quick, although they're not quick questions, but but the next question that I'd like to hear from you all on is, you know, once we have that program, once we know what we want it, what our goals are, and once we have some criteria developed, then we have to develop the actual program. And so what are those tools, services, and benefits that would be valuable to individuals who qualify for a social equity program? Kind of along the lines of what we've learned from other jurisdictions. We listed out some possible ideas and strategies here. These are not at all meant to be the only ideas that are open for discussion, but just some that we've heard about and learned about through either the feedback we learned through the study we did, or conversations we'd had over the last year, or seeing what other jurisdictions have done. So first of all, looking at how licenses are allocated. And how they would, both for the new licenses as well as licenses that would be released under the lottery, which is to happen sometime in 2021. Reviewing those existing application requirements, such as possession of the property, having a public hearing, proof of financial capability, or location requirements. Looking at some type of workforce development or mentorship program. I think it's great. Sarah, I actually didn't know about that program that you talked about earlier, and it's exciting. And I think we should keep talking about how we as the city can help and collaborate on that as well. Some technical assistance, talking about legal clinics or assisting with business plan development and accounting and some of those other real technical pieces. Low interest loans, business resources, and those B2B networking events. I was on John's call on Monday, and it was a great opportunity for different businesses to be networking. And then along those same lines, developing those ancillary or connected businesses, and any others that you all are open to. So which of these ideas sound like things that we could hang our hat on or pursue, and what are we missing in this list here?
Well, John Bailey here.
Sorry, John Bailey, Councilman Sidbaka is on queue. You're
Okay,
next.
no problem.
So I think one, and John was probably going to bring it up, was the grandfathering in, or basically not ending a license when a business goes out of business. They maintain the license and can sell the license. I think that should not be happening. You can't sell your driver's license to someone, so you shouldn't be able to sell that. I think that the zoning is discriminatory, and we know that we're disproportionately impacting Black and brown neighborhoods. And so I think if we do open up license types, or even with the lottery, I think we need to spread where these licenses can exist so that they're not all concentrated disproportionately in one or two neighborhoods. Those are two of the top ones.
Great. Thank you. John?
Well, first of all these are great ideas. I mean, absolutely great ideas. But the biggest idea is down under other. There are so many additional things that could be added to this, from the Community Investment Fund to just making sure that we're clear about the local ordinance, or something very basic, which you asked 2 meetings ago and that we haven't addressed. Should Denver opt in to medical and deliveries? I mean, to the delivery piece and the consumption piece coming up. And so, I mean, to me, it's under others, because there's going to be so many additional things that are going to be helpful. I mean, everybody on here can give you either a horror story or a success story where they made a recommendation to somebody that will make their business successful. So the relationship piece and the mentoring piece and being able to learn from fall down 7 and get up 8 piece is going to be very important. But I do want to stress that I think that what y'all have put here are very good ideas and good thought starters in terms of moving this conversation.
Great, thank you. Any others that jump out, or anything we're missing from anybody else?
We have Art on queue, and then we have Truman with a question for Councilwoman Sidbaka.
Okay.
Yeah, Art Way with Equitable Consulting. I think some type of assistance with the legal aspect that many of these equity applicants will have to deal with. So, I mean, you have business resources here, and maybe you can just, I don't know if you can include legal assistance in that, because especially with the accelerator program, a lot of these applicants are going to be dealing with a serious disparity in regards to whoever is hosting them when it comes to their equity agreement that the Marijuana Enforcement Division is requiring in that situation. So I don't know if we can, the city of Denver could maybe have some type of relationship with a law firm that can maybe engage pro bono, or whether we are providing some type of funds. But, I think that's going to be a foundational need for many of these equity applicants, is legal assistance. And so, I think everything here is good, but one thing I want you all to also think about is what type of benefit can you provide to those in the industry who want to be one of those 1 or 2 people willing to step up and really play ball. And this is especially for the accelerator program too. So, not only think about how we can help equity applicants, but how can we help the few people in the industry willing to engage, especially in the accelerator program. So there may be some things the city of Denver that can do that the state is not willing to offer.
Yep, excellent point. And hopefully a discussion we can have. It was actually one of the questions kind of towards the end of the presentation today. So looking like we'll be continuing this conversation into our next meeting. So excellent point. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts around what we can be doing to ensure the existing industry is assisting in all of these efforts. Anything else on this one here?
I think Truman has a question.
That's right. Yep, Truman.
Hi, this is a question for Councilwoman Sita Baca. Councilwoman, were you saying that you would support not being able to sell existing licenses? And if so, how does that benefit social equity, please?
I think that when you have, so in my neighborhood, in less than 15 square miles, we have over 200 licenses for marijuana grow houses. When one goes out of business, they're not necessarily making their license available to a social equity applicant. They're making their license available to the highest bidder. And so I feel like when you allow a company to be able to sell their license without it automatically going back into the pool where there's some regulation on who should get it, you have exactly what you've had in the entire founding of this country. You know, redlining happened because you had white property owners who would only sell to other white property owners. And so we have a situation like that. And I think that we need to pull that resale of licenses back into the control of the city, where you can make sure that we're considering these new factors and these new layers that we're trying to add for equity purposes. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, certainly. I guess I would maybe disagree with some of the analogies. I don't think a business license is analogous to a driver's license for many reasons. A driver's license is unique to an individual. And I do think it would be a difficult, I think it would be ill-advised to force licensees that have gone through great hardship so far to not be able to sell their license, you know, when it's time for them to move on down the road. So I guess I'll leave my comments there.
Anything else from anybody?
Yeah, this is John Bailey on what Truman just said. You know, Truman, have you been watching NFL football at all? Do you know what's happening with the black coach scenario there? You know,
you're talking about the Rooney Rule?
Yeah. You know,
yeah,
one of the reasons that they did that. Yeah, one of the reasons that they did that is because the white coaches who were head coaches and the owners who are 100% white played the good old boy rule on the black coaches. So none of the black coaches could ever get beyond offensive, defensive coordinator, and many of them were as good as any of the young white coaches they brought through. But what they ended up doing was just used us as tutorial material to make sure that the young white guys got the opportunity. What the councilwoman and a lot of us are saying is that if we come to the dance and you invite us, after all these years you invite us, and then you ask us what do we think, and we raise the question about, well, what about the music? Or what about the food? Or what about the decor? We don't want anyone getting angry because we're raising those questions. Obviously, for us to be invited to the party, and obviously for the opportunity to be there, for us all to get along, you know, you have to be able to take what we're saying. And I think that what she's saying to you is that, you know, you can't give back to those folks who got early entry if they got early entry only because they got the finances to be there. And that's my point about the revoked licenses. Why give revoked licenses to people who are early entries and who have the money to buy when you have social applicant people who are ready maybe to do the same thing? And so I don't think we're all disagreeing here, but we are raising issues that need to be taken a look at closely. And this, again, is a pro and con issue.
May I respond?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
you're next in line.
John, I appreciate your comments here. Again, I'm quite familiar with the Rooney Rule in football, and it did not have the desired outcome. I think that's pretty clear. There are fewer minority head coaches and offensive and defensive coordinators now than there were when the Rooney Rule was instituted. And I think the NFL has pretty much admitted that that was a failure, and they considered looking at other options this year. But as it pertains to cannabis, I'm all ears to hear what people of color have had to say, and that's why I haven't spoken in this, in the last 3 hours.
I know you are.
So hang on, please. I don't think the Rooney Rule is analogous at all to people selling their licenses, and here's why. Because in football, you're right. You're making the point that coaches of color have been overlooked and passed over by a good old boy network. But when it comes to people purchasing a license, that's where it's not really a good old boy network. It's, just people wanting to exit the industry. I would be shocked if there are people wanting to exit the industry that would not sell to a person of color, if the cash was equal. I can't speak for everybody, but for me, I certainly wouldn't worry too much about that. So I guess those are my thoughts. I think you said something about people being angry. I'm certainly not angry. I've been down at the Capitol protesting over the last weekend, and I'm fully supportive of all of the things that have been discussed here today. It just seems that restricting licensees from selling, forcing them to go back to the city, I think that would be pretty dramatic, for lack of a better word.
So I'll just jump in quickly because I would like to get to the last question, but and along those lines, Truman, something that we have heard is that, and would love to hear some thoughts on this, maybe if we have time in the next session, but that prohibiting transfer of ownership of licenses could actually inadvertently negatively impact social equity licensees if they are put into a position later on of not being able to benefit in the same way from selling their license. So, if they put that time and energy into building a business and 10 years from now want to sell that license, it would be, I guess, an even playing field if everybody was not able to. But there is, like to John's point around pros and cons, those are some of the different perspectives, I think.
I think that I'm in queue for a response, and sure. I want to clarify that the analogy does make sense because a license is a property interest. Not everyone gets one, whether it's a driver's license or a business license, and rules determine who to include or exclude and who benefits. And so when you bring up the point that it would discourage people from getting a license because they couldn't sell it, and that you would sell certainly to another Black or brown person if the price was right, I think that fails to absorb what we've heard as being the top barrier, which is capital. And so the price is rarely ever going to be right because capital is the primary barrier for people of color. And so you don't, if you create a first right of refusal for social equity applicants, that's a different way to transfer licenses, but you're not going to make profit off of it because the goal is social equity, not private profit.
If I may jump in once more, please.
Yes, please, go ahead.
All right. If you go to Westward over the last 2 or 3 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 issues, you've noticed how many major players in the state have bought smaller interests, have bought smaller dispensaries. I'm wondering if those smaller dispensaries went to the city, went to the industry, went to the Black community, went to anybody and said, hey, are there any Black folks out here or any brown folks out here who want to buy, my dispensary? I'm willing to bet that the conversation went down, Bob, I'm getting ready to sell my dispensary. Are you interested? And Bob said, yeah, Tom, I am. Bob and Tom know each other. It's not like they don't know each other. And so, that transfer happens over the golf course, over a joint, over a cocktail, however it goes down. But it's not an opportunity that's been afforded to us because we're not Bob or Tom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point.
But I still love you, Truman.
I'm only keeping it quiet here because I've said my piece, but we should get coffee soon, John. If you guys want to buy some dispensaries, I know about a dozen, so anybody can reach out to me.
All right, so
may I make a couple points of clarification
yes,
as
please,
well,
go ahead.
really quickly. You know, I think it's worth noting that at the state level, there are states that have created a finite number of licenses to be awarded. And at the state level, there is no finite number of licenses to be awarded. Local jurisdictions have chosen to enact caps. I know that Denver waited many, many years before putting a moratorium in place for a long time. But I do want to point out that the state level, there is no finite number of licenses to be awarded. And so it's not like another license could not be created at the state level in terms of having to sell it to somebody else. And then I just want to point out that I guess the closest similar related regulated industry is liquor, and liquor licenses are free to be bought and sold as they please. Any owners, they don't go back into a queue. I think that there's a finite number of liquor licenses, at least maybe at the local level. I don't know how that works, but you know, I do want to point out that another heavily regulated industry, those licenses have the ability to be freely bought and sold.
Great, thank you. And in Denver, there is no cap on liquor licenses, but there may be other places. So we only have 6 minutes left, but we have a lot of more questions that we didn't get to today. So I'm thinking that we at least spend the next session, our fourth meeting, the majority of it kind of returning to some of these questions that we didn't get to today. I know we still have some other questions that are kind of more general catch-all questions that we'd like to still get to as a part of this as well. So maybe we just see how much we can get through in the next session and then have a conversation around whether we need to add a fifth meeting. Sorry. Don't be mad. But I think there are some really important conversations and great information that we gathered today. And so I just don't want to cut us too short at all. So what I would encourage is that all of you do take a look at the slides that we had sent out for today, and maybe be able to just be prepared for those conversations for the next one. The one that I was really wanting to spend some more time on that warrants more than the 5 minutes we have left is, I don't know the slide number, but basically just given the current economic climate, what are some possible funding ideas for a cannabis social equity program in Denver? As some of you may have seen in the news, currently the city of Denver is facing a $226 million budget gap for 2020, which is pretty substantial. And so we are looking at cuts around every corner and being asked to propose reduction proposals. Furlough days are being taken by city employees. And so, you know, definitely something that we need to consider. And then there's some information that we can share. There's a little bit of information in the presentation, but just kind of letting you know what the cannabis related revenue sources are, which include licensing fees. We have a sales tax. We have just the general sales tax on both medical and retail. And then there's a special sales tax on retail, which is currently at 5.5%. It is a floating tax approved by the voters in 2013 that can go up, I believe, to 15%, but was increased from 3.5 to 5.5, I believe, in the fall of 2018. And currently that 2%, as we let you know before, is dedicated to affordable housing programs. And then we have a possible new revenue source that we've talked about with this group before around if we opt into delivery, there's a required delivery surcharge in state statute of $1. And so thinking through that as well. So I'll end there and just encourage you all to look through the slides to make sure we can continue this conversation thoughtfully. As you know, it was wonderfully and thoughtful today. And so just want to continue that in the next session, which I believe is June 28th, same time, same place. Any final thoughts from anybody?
Hey, Molly, I just wanted to say to you and Ashley and the staff there, I mean, I know this has been a difficult time putting all of us together and having all these conversations, but speaking on behalf of all of us, we really appreciate what y'all are doing. The work group, the effort, bringing us together. and the time and moving us in a direction that's going to make social equity in the cannabis industry much more progressive and positive. So I just personally want to thank you.
Well, thank you, John. This is Ashley. And I've really appreciated the conversations every time we've had these conversations. But the person who I haven't called out publicly has been Molly, and Molly's just really, I think, done a great job leading this conversation and keeping us all organized. So thank you, Molly. And John, thanks for recognizing Molly.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate all of your thoughts and collaboration, and you all make it very easy when you're thoughtful and respectful and all of that. So thank you.
Thanks, Molly.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, everybody.
Bye.
Weekend. Bye-bye.
See ya.